are listening to a free version of the Majority Report with Sam Steeder. To support the show and get another 15 minutes of daily program, go to majority.fm, please.
The Majority Report with Sam Steeder.
It's Thursday, December 19th, 2019. I'm Michael Brooks on a Michael Thursday. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We're broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On today's program, Isabel Peñaranda and Julián Gómez-Delgado are both joining us. They're co-authors of a great new piece in the Jacobin, Colombia's New Awakening, all about the strike wave against neoliberalism and austerity and military and paramilitary violence taking place across Colombia. They'll be joining us. Citizenship law in India, which takes aim at millions of Muslims, is sparking protests across that country in defiance, even as the siege on Kashmir continues. French unions meet with the government as pension strikes continue. Donald Trump has been impeached for abuse of power and obstruction of justice. Nancy Pelosi suggests that they may delay sending the impeachment to the Senate. Donald Trump, while being impeached, suggested that the deceased former Congressman John Dingell might be in hell. And I will say, actually, to audible groans, even in his own crowd. That's the takeaway from that clip. The Bolivian coup government has issued an arrest warrant for former president, illegally removed President Evo Morales. Chile protests are 2 months on as the UN documents multiple human rights abuses by the Piñera government. A Brazilian Supreme Court justice has issued a stunning statement that the discredited Lava Jato operation that made Lula a political prisoner was, quote, was set on destroying businesses and strategic interests of the Brazilian national economy. In an explosive interview in a Sao Paulo newspaper, fifth Pentagon official announces resignation in 7 days. And key Republican Senator Bucks McConnell to push for a new drug pricing bill. And what to expect in the Democratic debate tonight, besides, of course, coverage on the Majority Report and then TMPS after. Sorry, you got to do plugs, folks. Sometimes you got to do plugs. It is what it is. Donald Trump was impeached yesterday. There's a lot to disaggregate here, and we're going to start with this is from Fox News. Wait, are we doing number one first? Yeah. Okay. This is what Donald Trump was talking about while he was getting impeached, among many other things in Michigan, including, by the way, I will say some very good new Pete Buttigieg material. Let's check this out.
The whole thing, and we've ordered a lot of those planes. We've ordered a lot of great stuff.
He's talking about the F-35, which is a very wasteful plane.
Extremely wasteful.
And I won't tell you the story, but very early on, I thought we were going to have a problem someplace. And one of the generals came up to me and said, "Sir, don't go. Don't do it. Why? We don't have the ammunition." And I said two things. I never want to hear a president, right? We never want to have a president hear that again, nor do we want a president to have to go through the crap that we're going through.
Okay, pause it. So he literally, as he's rambling about this Pentagon boondoggle and says crap that we had to go through, the vote hits 216 and then promptly 17, which means the impeachment has passed the House. Of course, three Democrats, I believe, voted against the impeachment. Jared Pollin from Maine voted yes on one article, no on the other. And then two other Democrats voted no. Tulsi Gabbard voted present. Justin Amash, who is a former Republican who left the Republican Party, voted yes, and every single Republican voted against. This is how the vote was presented on Fox News.
Donald J. Trump sacrificed our national security in an effort to cheat in the next election.
This lawless partisan impeachment is a political suicide march for the Democrat Party.
If we cannot impeach a president who abuses his office for personal advantage, we no longer live in a democracy.
They've cheapened the impeachment process.
Facts show that the president's North Star is Russia, not the Constitution.
While Democrats are obsessed with impeachment, we're focused on jobs, jobs, jobs.
Today, we have a president who seems to believe he is a king.
It doesn't really feel like we're being impeached. The country is doing better than ever before.
We know. All right, after 11 hours of debate, you saw much of it yesterday here on the Fox News channel.
All right, so there you have it. I want to tease a couple of things apart here. First of all, we need to be talking about this a lot more. In the same phase of time, the Trump administration has put vicious, disgusting new eligibility requirements, which will translate to potentially hundreds of thousands, not tens of thousands of people losing their SNAP benefits. Those are automatic kick-ins for people who would not have food otherwise. There's also a new Trump administration Social Security proposal that would, in effect, cut thousands of people off of disability benefits, which definitely, the goal is to phase out and gut Social Security and Medicare. But make no mistake, they've had a lot more support and success in demonizing and lying about the most vulnerable, namely people with disabilities on these programs. So when he's ranting and raving about jobs, keep in mind the relentless, vicious, anti-populist austerity agenda that's happening every single day from this administration. And then, of course, what I'd like to see is a Bernie Sanders say to Donald Trump exactly what Trump said actually in 2016. Oh, really? The numbers? The numbers in the economy? Wall Street is humming? Oligarchs are making more money? What about people who teach school for a living driving an Uber to survive? Let's be real about those numbers. The crisis of this economy and our level of inequality gets worse and worse by the day, and the economic indicators do not tell that story. So
on that note, I just kind of want to jump on it. Like, it's, to be honest, with those metrics, those economic metrics doing so well by traditional standards, Trump still, people are still supportive of this impeachment quite a bit. Like half the country, despite the economy doing as well as those metrics say it is.
That's right. And his approval ratings, they've actually ticked up. There's some mixed polling. Support for impeachment, I believe, is up to 52%. However, there's been some recent polls where Trump's personal approval rating is edged up, and a USA Today poll, which is an outlier. If you look at Real Clear Politics, almost every Real Clear Politics poll shows a head-to-head of Biden beating Trump, mostly Sanders beating Trump, and Warren and Buttigieg tied or losing to Trump. There was a USA Today poll that came out a couple days ago, and again, it's an outlier poll as far as I could see, where Trump led everybody, which I haven't seen before. So there are some concerning signals as well. And I'll just conclude that you cannot allow this process to crowd out a conversation on the obscene new Pentagon budget that was just passed, where this guy that Steny Hoyer is correctly accusing of dictatorial ambitions, they gave him a Space Force and a completely unaccountable Pentagon budget. And I'm not making this point to buy your logic them or to concern troll about the Democrats. You don't need to take the second step. That's right in your face. That is a profound and dangerous contradiction because you're right. This is a grotesque narcissist who poses a threat to the entire planet. And it is a performative contradiction to impeach him on a narrow thing, criminal wrongdoing, no question, but it's a narrow thing. And then turn around and give him a completely unaccountable Pentagon budget. AUMF not touched, Yemen not touched, war in Iran not touched, arms control not touched. I don't even want to read Joseph Cicerione's thread on the arms control element of this. It's a horrifying budget. There is, and of course, there is a reversal of his discrimination against transgender troops. This is not left-wing complaining. This is, you better get serious at some point or another about politics. You want to actually beat this guy, which in fact is an urgent emergency. And the other thing I would say is, I don't know what the right move is in terms of sending it to the Senate or not. I think that politically, by the time we get to an election, that this is a wash. I think it motivates people on both sides. I'm not sure how it plays out. And I primarily do look at it as a political exercise because it is a political exercise, not going to get removed from office. And it is an important, absolutely a notation that the executive branch engaging in criminal conduct is wrong. And of course, they should do that. This is not that complicated. I wish, and I would fast track literally thousands of other pieces of wrongdoing over this, including, by the way, inciting racism. What Congressman Al Green was talking about this a couple years ago, my understanding was limited because I had the misunderstanding that high crimes and misdemeanors meant like exceptional cases, not my present understanding, thanks to that testimony, that essentially it just meant crimes in high places of any kind, or maybe, frankly, just even damaging the country and being incompetent. And something like stoking racism would certainly fit the bill in my mind. But all that being said, I want people to be really realistic about this, how this might play out politically. I am not as sanguine as other people because I totally see a scenario where you get to the Senate. I don't think any Republican is – look, no Republican is going to vote to remove Donald Trump in the Senate. Some of them might pay a higher price than others. Susan Collins might pay a higher price. I think, honestly, by the time we get to the fall, people are not thinking about this. I am also extremely confident, borderline certain, that Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema will vote against this. And I think Doug Jones is a possibility. I would not put him in a certainty. I think he's got more he's not my politics, but I think he has more integrity than those two, frankly, and would take this process more seriously. But I also think he's a senator from Alabama. And that's a tough vote. Sinema and Manchin. So you will have a situation where Donald Trump and the Republicans will be able to go across the country and use all these talking points and say, when it got to the Senate, the Republicans were uniformly against it and 2 Democrats voted against it. Now, everybody who's informed about anything knows that Manchin and Sinema are extreme far right-wing hacks. They vote the wrong way on all sorts of things, but most people don't know that, and the top line doesn't look good. So I'm just putting that all out there. I think they are literally obligated to do this, by the way. I don't oppose it, but I think people need to be very thoughtful about how this plays out and really start foregrounding SNAP, jobs, Social Security, because that is what this election is going to come down to for most people in the key states where people actually need to turn out and vote, not for people in, Brooklyn on Twitter or whatever.
I think when Charles Blow says, like, this is for all the kids in cages.
It's not.
Exactly.
Literally not.
It's literally not. That's a disgusting statement.
They just approved billions of dollars in the budget for border spending. It's just not.
And the reason Charles Blow feels
despicable.
The need to say that is because people recognize that normal people don't feel themselves represented in this impeachment process. And that's a problem.
And by the way, that's where and that's where the real fight is. I mean, I am actually, just as I would say that obviously you're not going to go out across the country and tell people that they're not going to have borders or whatever. Like that is not a 2020 presidential campaign message. We all know that. I actually have enough belief, partially in mobilizing the coalition of the Democratic Party in the best sense, that actually going out there and saying that this is a moral certainty that we don't have a kidnapping ring and concentration camps in this country, and we're going to stop that policy. Then we're going to have a criminal investigation of the administration and the institutions that implemented it. And you know what? Yes, they would be able to run with it on their side, give Fox News a ton of content, but it would also resonate with serious, well-meaning people who know that in a gut, visceral sense. Now, again, he clearly broke the law with this stuff. I don't see, The most credible arguments that I have seen, frankly, are people who would acknowledge that there was wrongdoing and maybe say, like, yeah, but either it should be something else, or are we really going to do this over that? I don't happen to agree with that. But anybody denying what actually happened here, I mean, I don't even know how to respond to that. We literally all know what happened. But you cannot lose sight of a larger politics, and we need to be very thoughtful about how impeachment is going to play out. The positive signal is that the numbers have gone up. On the other hand, he's not going to get removed, and this is nothing like a knockout blow, even remotely. So a call for some strategy. And don't say that this is a vote for those children. Don't say it's a vote. Don't say it's a vote about his corruption. Don't say it's a vote. I mean, it is, but not his systemic corruption, not his emoluments. It's not a vote about the parade of sickness coming out of this man in administration. Bill Fletcher Jr., pardon the imagery, said right-wing populism is the herpes of capitalism. You literally could use Donald Trump's picture in the dictionary to demonstrate that. And you have to remove the conditions that lead to the sickness. Or we're going to be in a serious predicament, even if we remove the emergency of Trump in 2020, which, again, is the only way he's going to be removed. It's going to be an election. So you have to think, how is it going to affect the election? But at any rate, the problem that keeps so many businesses from knowing their numbers is their hodgepodge of business systems. They have one system for accounting, another for sales, another for inventory, and so on. It's just a big inefficient mess that takes up too much time and too many resources. And that hurts the bottom line. Introducing NetSuite by Oracle, the business management software that handles every aspect of your business in an easy-to-use cloud platform and gives you the visibility and control you need to grow. With NetSuite, you save time, money, and unneeded headaches by managing sales, finance, accounting, orders, and HR instantly right from your desktop or phone. That's why NetSuite is the world's #1 cloud business system. And right now, NetSuite is offering you valuable insights with a free guide, 7 key strategies to grow your profits at netsuite.com/majority. That's netsuite.com/majority to download your free guide, 7 key strategies to grow your profits. netsuite.com/majority. We're going to take a brief break, folks, and we are going to come right back with the authors of a great new piece in the Jacobin, Colombia Awakens. Colombia's New Awakening. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Majority Report. Michael Brooks here. Joining us now are two esteemed guests. Isabel Peñaranda, she is a master's student based in Bogota, Colombia. Julián Gómez-Delgado, who is a PhD candidate, PhD student based in the United States. He is also, from Colombia. They're co-authors of a new piece in the Jacobin, Colombia's New Awakening. Isabel, Julián, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Isabel, if you're there, I hope I'm going to start with you. Can you just broadly situate everybody watching and listening? What has been happening in Colombia over the past couple of months in terms of the social movement and strikes that are taking place there?
So the original strike was called for the 21st of November, and it was called by the kind of traditional groups that usually call strikes. So labor unions, the student movement, and, the traditional left. But in the days leading up to the 21st of November, the government launched this kind of mad stigmatizing campaign, and that added to what was happening in Chile and the just growing discontent, a series of kind of public scandals, led to this thing, taking on new proportions that no one I've talked to in Colombia can remember ever having seen. So the 21st of November, just hundreds of thousands of people came out, and the kind of traditional repertoire of marching to the, historic centers of the cities not only had more numbers of people than I think had ever been seen, but then just lasted into the night. And then these new modalities like the cacerolazo, people coming out with their pans on the streets, like hitting them into the night, just kind of gained new momentum and went on for a good week. So every night you would be hearing cacerolazos all over the city, and this was happening all over the country, which was also unusual. So now the strike isn't as active as in the first week, but it's still going and kind of transforming. So we'll see what happens.
So, Julián, I want to get to you in just one moment to ask you about the actual nature of the current government in Colombia. But Isabel, could you just tell us what they were protesting to? There was a package of austerity and cuts on Social Security, but it also broadened out to include basically ongoing extrajudicial and governmental violence against the left in Colombia.
Yes, the original reasons that the labor unions in the more traditional sectors called were against a series of what they were calling the paquetazo, the big neoliberal package, which involved a tax reform, pension reform, the creating of a financial holding with kind of national financial assets, these kinds of things. But what ended up happening, and what we argue in the article we wrote, is that a kind of chain of equivalence was created. And so, an incredible variety of demands poured out onto the streets. So you have LGBT rights, you have feminist rights, you have a lot of people protesting shark hunting. A big thing was also protesting that the government has systematically failed to implement the peace agreements it signed with the Revolutionary Forces of Colombia, the FARC. So when you go out on the street, you will see literally hundreds of different demands, and they're all kind of aggregated in the space of the strike.
Julián, who is Colombia's president, Duque? Where does he come from politically? And then maybe actually after you explain that, you could connect that, if you could, to why this government has not observed its ends of the bargain of the peace deal with the FARC.
Of course. Well, Ivan Duque, today's current Colombian president, he comes directly from the Uribe, like he was the one who Uribe elected. He had not previous experience.
Julián, I'm sorry. Could you tell us who Alvaro Uribe is? For many people won't know. Just situate that a little bit. Thank you.
Sure. Alvaro Uribe is the most popular, until now, we should say, politician in modern Colombian history.
He was elected in 2002 and then re-elected in 2006. And he more or less has like a link to paramilitary death squads, and he is also like a pro-neoliberal and extractivist politician who, after the peace agreements, he, in a sense, create a whole coalition against those peace agreements and promoted a campaign so Colombians vote against this referendum that happened on October 2016. So in a sense, Uribe is the leader of these people who are against peace building in Colombia, and he appointed Ivan Duque last year as his representative. And in a sense, people in the streets and even in some surveys, they told people that they were going to vote for the one who Uribe elect or select. So in a sense, Duque is not a man with historical political background, but he won the elections last year against a coalition of the left that for the first time in Colombian history went to the runoff. And then what we are seeing today, and that's why precisely this historical conjuncture is so important, that we are seeing this, let's say, like the fall of Uribismo hegemony. In a sense, today, currently, the holding Ivan Duque president, he has like an impressive 70% disapproval rating. Yeah. And Uribe too, it's near. He has a 69% disapproval, which is the highest of any Colombian president. And this is unprecedented in Colombian history, which had previously like high percentage of Uribe's approval.
I'm going to ask you both to answer both give answers for this next question. And Julian, I'll just continue with you for the first part. There were two candidates of the left, if I understand you correctly, running in 2017. And I'd like you to explain Angela Maria Robledo. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that. And then, Isabel, I'd like you to explain Gustavo Petro. But Julian, starting with you, could you explain at least where this one candidate, Angela Maria, comes from in terms of her position on the left and this broader kind of electoral push?
Sure. Well, that's a really important question because basically Angela Maria, political history, she comes from, let's say, a center-left party. The name is like the Green Party, which is nonetheless not much caring about environmental policies, but they move between the center and the left. And in a sense, he quits this party in order to create a new coalition and, in a sense, to help Petro to build like a more broader center-left coalition. And in a sense, she also represents a lot of feminist groups that were out of the political sphere and that today are having like a lot of importance and influence in the political debates and even in the participation and organization of the current strike.
And Isabel, who is Gustavo Petro?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if it's exactly clear. Angela Robledo was Gustavo Petro's vice presidential candidate. So they weren't two different candidates. Okay, they were part of the same candidacy.
Got it. Okay.
But it is really important.
But it's a coalition, correct? Like they represent different parties and interests, or is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
But in the 2017-18 presidential election, they came together on the same ballot under a party which was then not recognized as a party because of the opposition, I guess they represented, called Colombia Humana. And so the Gustavo Petro is was an incredibly is an incredibly charismatic politician who emerged out of the M19 guerrilla army and then demobilized, and then became one of the most recognizable senators in the Senate for his, he denounced parapolitics, he denounced corruption, he denounced a lot of the kind of violence intrinsic in the Colombian political system, and then he became Bogota's mayor, and Bogota is the most important city in Colombia, and was kind of very systematic opposition, and was actually deposed for kind of technicalities surrounding the trash collection system. And then in 2018, he became a presidential candidate with Angela Robledo, and it was the first time in Colombian history that a leftist candidate made it to the runoff round, and he got 8 million votes, which was unprecedented in a country where the left has been consistently stigmatized as guerrilla sympathizers, as Castro-Chavista sympathizers, and where, the persecution against the left has taken on the form of political genocide. So the UP de Unión Patriótica, which was one of the first leftist political parties made out of demobilized guerrilla fighters in the 80s, was systematically killed. So 3,000 of its leaders were assassinated in the kind of dirty war in the context of the Cold War of the 80s. So the fact that Petro got as far as he did is incredible. And I do think that was one of the that is one of the reasons that this strike has taken on the dimensions that it has. Even though it isn't politicized, this is not a strike that responds to Petro's particular political agenda, but something much broader.
Yeah, Isabel, I want to stay with you on that theme for a minute, and I make sure I'm reading you correctly. You guys sort of identify an advantage and disadvantage to some of that spontaneity, in terms of it isn't driven in the top down and by an electoral sort of prospect, but at the same time, some of the kind of spontaneous emphasis might not congeal in the same clear way. You talk about how the right wing has the kind of language that you just talked about. Like you quote them talking about Castro-Chavismo or narco-terrorism. Can you kind of talk about the difference there in terms of how this movement can get shaped into something that's durable and affects state institutions?
Yeah, I think that is the most important question that the left needs to resolve right now. So I think that we have to be very careful in kind of romanticizing the spontaneity of a lot of these movements.
Right.
And it's definitely very important. It's unprecedented. We haven't seen anything like this, and it's happening all over Latin America. So I do think it's very important to recognize and to legitimize this, but we can't treat it as an end to itself. So the mass mobilizations, the people on the street for days, as inspiring as it is, cannot be our political objective, but is only one first step in taking this. And I think one of the warning signs is that, as we mentioned in an article, the populist praxis, because Ernesto Laclau calls it a praxis, it doesn't have ideological content.
Right.
It can go either very far right, as we've seen in Brazil, as we've seen in Bolivia right now. That can all be called populist. You're seeing it in the U.S. or just, in England or the UK a few days ago. So the populist practice can turn right, and it has in Colombia historically. And Julián mentioned this. Álvaro Uribe, during the peak of his human rights violations, had an 80% approval rating. Mm-hmm. So I think in Colombia, we are aware of this risk, but in this kind of the fervor of the last month, we can forget that the populism, was also used against the peace agreements, in the plebiscite against the peace agreement. So what the left needs to do is institutionalize the new bonds that are being created on the streets in these days. And institutionalize, maybe not institutionalize, but formalize. We need to recognize that there are people out on the streets for the first time, maybe in their lives. And those people need to find a way to meaningfully connect to politics, maybe beyond an electoral agenda, but definitely in a way that has a day-to-day practice that, connect them to there's neighborhood committees coming up and neighborhood assemblies that can connect people to their more local problems. And definitely, I think something we can learn from the U.S. Social movement, like DSA, is that people need to be given tasks and need to put into very tangible material practices this kind of frustration that is bringing them out onto the street.
Absolutely. Julián, can you get us into the specifics? I mean, you guys have both raised different versions of basically the history of right-wing violence and state violence against the left. But can you maybe, and you can go back as far back as you want historically, if you want to touch on the 80s, if you want to just focus on the Uribe era, but taking us at least to now in the specific ways that even post this agreement with the FARC, and I should tell people, my understanding is that even though basically the previous Santos government, the agreement they negotiated went to referendum, it was rejected narrowly in a referendum, but the government still basically said they would observe the agreement anyway. And that's the context we're in. But can you really fill in the history of the extent and scope of violence used against the left presently and historically in Colombia?
Of course, yes. Well, this is, of course, like a long history, which doesn't only include like what happens in the 80s with the Unión Patriótica, as Isabel mentioned, but probably goes back into the 50s, 60s, in a moment where the particular form of the state in Colombia turned out to be like a counter-insurgent form, no? So basically during the late 50s and early 60s until the beginnings of the 1970s, there was like a bipartisan coalition government between the Liberal and the Conservative Party, which are like the hegemonic parties in Colombia, and they called this agreement a National Front. And among other things, the National Front that ruled from 1958 to 1974 agreed to have like a temporal distribution of power in which both liberal and conservative had like they alternate the presidency every 4 years during these 16 years, while also dividing equally the ministerial bureaucracy, parliamentary representation, the judicial power, and almost all the public jobs. And what does this really means? That in a sense, this marked like a rhythm of democracy in Colombia, in which left groups were excluded from political participation. So, for instance, the Communist Party or other kinds of populist party as the Alianza Nacional Popular, ANAPO, which was like a popular experiment party in the 70s, were excluded from political participation. And in a sense, this is the moment in which right-wing politics in Colombia institutionalize a rhetorical repertory in which everyone who thinks or who identifies as being of the left is classified as a guerrilla member. Mm-hmm. So basically, during the 60s and all across along this late 20 and until the peace agreements, everyone who was identified as a leftist was also equated as a member of the guerrilla, which is something that is going, in a sense, to end with the peace agreement, which of course is like a huge step forward. So what we are seeing now is that it's very difficult for a right-wing person in Colombia today to classify someone who is demanding public education, more access to health, or even guarantee over pensions to be equated as a far left-wing guerrilla member. So this is what we are seeing today.
And that's a big opportunity. Could you just, Julián, follow up just briefly, if you can, I know it's a very extensive other subject, but just as part of that militarization and war against the left, what is the U.S. role in Colombia broadly, but particularly as it connects to military, paramilitary forces, and how the narco war gets overlapped with the war against the left?
Of course, this is a really complex and long story, but for giving you just one example, in 1964 there was this Plan Lasso, that is what was called Plan Lasso, and it was like a military cooperation between the U.S. military forces and the Colombian military forces to, in a sense, threw some bombs into peasant communities that were then known as independent republics. And from that episode, the FARC guerrillas formed. So this is like a long relationship, but that also then will express in the war on drugs, in Plan Colombia, that will then be exported to places such as Mexico. And it's the way that the Colombian state has approached to those quote-unquote different populations, no?
Right.
That instead of expanding the state with developmental policies, there is like a military approach in which assistance translates into, or social assistance translates into military action. And this is like very particular because the rhythm of the political right wing that has, in a sense, governed all around the 20th and the 21st century in Colombia, they have oriented the building of peace, paradoxically, in the name of war. Mm-hmm. So, and in this, the U.S. has a fundamental role in legitimizing politically, supposedly that there are enough reasons to fight these people, but also giving aid. Since the Alliance for Progress in the 60s, passing through the Plan Colombia, and also now against drug traffickers.
Isabel, final question for you. And just looping back, you guys mentioned before, and you say in the article that 72% of people consulted in a poll, a recent poll, show that they think the government is going the quote-unquote wrong path. 60% also want a return to normality. And I mean, I hate polls like that because they're very frustrating, but I think that that's the honest reflection of so many electorates in terms of the contradictions that we're dealing with. But I do, I mean, and you know, start with you, Isabel. Obviously, Julián, if you have anything to add, you know, in summation, this is the where do we go from here question. I mean, you talked strategically about what you think is important for the left, and there's been contradictory responses by the Duque government. But where do you see things going in the next period of time?
Yeah, I do think that poll is at least indicative of what the left needs to keep in mind in moving forward. People definitely intuit that something is deeply wrong. And I think people generally reject the government's handling of this entire situation. So in the days since the strike has started, the government has created the financial holding that the strike, called against. It has passed the tax reform law that we protest against, and it just has consistently ignored everything that is happening on the street. So I think that those contradictions will continue to deepen as the government's complete dismissal of the legitimate claims being made on the street. It will, increase the internal opposition, and also fragmentations within the own ruling party. So the Liberal Party, which has never been particularly progressive, has rejected certain policies such as the tax reform law. So I do think those contradictions are being intensified just because of the strike. Mm-hmm. But what the organizers of the strike and what the left needs to do is, as I mentioned, I think, formalize some of the bonds, the grassroots bonds being created on the streets. I think we've had a new experience of what it means for the city to belong to us. And this is not just in Bogota. This has happened in all the major cities, even in small peripheral cities in the Amazon, on the coast. I think a lot of citizens are, for the first time, really experimenting politics as something that doesn't happen on the TV, but that is something that they embody. And so we need to formalize those bonds and turn them into meaningful day-to-day quotidian practices almost. We need to get people on their neighborhood committees. We need to get people to fight further against gentrification in their neighborhoods, to fight for, I don't know, lack of, less police presence and more different kinds of authority, more state services, et cetera. So I think that's where next year's agenda has to go.
Bring it to earth, in a way. Do you have anything to add to that, Julián?
Just probably that in figuring out how to do that, which is like a historical task, it's important perhaps to bring back, the Latin American perspective, no? And in a sense, this is crucial considering that Colombia is the second country with the highest income inequality across Latin America, only after Honduras. And this makes us recognize that, for example, in both Colombia and Chile, there are similar repertories of resistance, so people hitting with wooden spoons the pots, but also identifying similar enemies, no? For example, the state, and in particular the state brutality. Even though we also mentioned that although in both countries there are similarities, and most of the people have been focusing on the difficulties of identifying a unified leadership, we underline the fact that this should not be the focus, and rather, as Isabella mentioned before, that the crux of social protest today in both Chile and Colombia, and perhaps in other places in the global south, is to discover how to institutionalize popular power, and in a sense how to translate those broader demands into concrete objectives. And this is the present challenge for us.
Thank you both so much for being here. The piece is Colombia's New Awakening. It's in the Jacobin. It's a really, really fascinating piece, both on Colombia, obviously, but also I think some of the bigger strategic questions you guys are exploring have a lot of implications in many different contexts. So thank you both so much.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, folks, we are going to head to the fun half. It's a little, doing two-person interviews is always a little nerve-wracking, but I think that actually worked out really well.
Yeah, well done.
That was sweet.
I was in the break, I was going to compliment you. I didn't want to do it on air, though.
Oh, well, of course not.
Would love to compliment you on air, Michael, and say you did a wonderful job.
Thank you, Brendan. You should take up more speaking time. I thought, it was, honestly, it's really, I know how to move those things a bit, but that was a great, they were super synchronized. Right. That was awesome that they major testament to the guests. Become a member of the Majority Report today, majority.fm/become a member. That's how all this happens. Tonight, live coverage of the Democratic debates. Find out how many of us show up. I'm just kidding. We'll be there.
Will there be more people?
Will there be more people on stage than here? Definitely. But how big will the ratio be?
Yeah.
It's cold.
I'm just glad Tom Steyer will get a chance to be heard.
Yeah. I've been concerned. Every point you see for Bloomberg and Steyer we know the whole system is an oligarchy, but those are the numbers for just raw money.
Yeah, raw corporate force.
Just raw no business being there. Steyer has no business being there. Bloomberg, well, he won't even be there, in fact. But he is, Steyer has no business being there because it's just ridiculous. Bloomberg actually was a mayor, and a really bad one.
A specter is haunting the debates.
Yeah, a specter is haunting the debates. You might even see this in a Majority Report video. Every time I see that little bastard's ads, God, it's actually really disgusting.
Seen Bloomberg ads?
I have seen Bloomberg ads on
Where are you guys seeing them?
Majority Report and TMBS videos.
I got to add
Instagram.
Yeah. Oh, no, actually, I have YouTube Premium, so I don't see any ads.
You don't see any ads. It's smart. But I mean, I actually like to, I should get it, but as horrible and as annoying as they are, I actually like to see what's out there. I mean, I think there's a little bit of value to that. Become a patron of the Michael Brooks Show. Last Sunday, on these Sunday Illicit History, we did a deep dive with Laura Carlson on AMLO's first year in office and even the potential of a U.S.-backed coup and how that would relate to the drug war. Very disturbing, very interesting, but also I would say a pretty fairly balanced assessment of AMLO, who, of course, I'm overall obviously supportive of. And then we had a brilliant show on Tuesday with Joshua Kahn Russell. On Monday, we close out the year with Richard Wolff, possibly one other guest, but definitely Richard Wolff in studio. We're talking about his new book. We're talking about the 18th Brumaire and many other subjects. Patreon.com/TMBS. We're having another surge. I'm pretty confident we will sell out the Bell House show on the 7th. So if you're thinking about it, I would go snag your tickets immediately. And the way you can find out everything from live shows to Patreon to our dope new TMBS gear is to go to tmbs.fm. And you can do everything that way. Matt, literary hangover.
Yeah, actually, recording tonight prior to the debate is going to be.
You and I are both. I'm not trying to. I have a thing at the gym, and you're recording, so we should. I hope Sam is listening. Just like, don't freak out, dude. Everybody's gonna be here.
I'll get here eventually.
Yeah, but yeah, exactly.
But I'll be talking about Pilgrim's Progress by John Bunyan. Is
everything okay? Yeah, it's fine. Okay, cool.
Yeah, it's some call it the first novel, at least influenced sort of the Robinson Crusoe. But it's a journey a Christian goes on after he reads a book. I mean, it's strongly implied that it's the Bible, but I think
the Bible.
It's. I was shocked by how it's an allegory, which you think is going to be boring, but I think actually there's something to the form that's very. You hear the voice of a John Bunyan wasn't an aristocrat. His dad was a tinker, so he'd like go from house to house like fixing stuff, like their windows and stuff like that. So he's a very working class, maybe not working class, but like lower level than you usually hear from back then. And you get a lot of colloquial dialogue in the midst of an allegory about following an ideology that you believe in. So
that's interesting.
Yeah.
I was going to say this during the break because I don't want to compliment Matt on air, but I am a satisfied patron.
Well, thank you very much.
Very, very good to introduce some of that sort of thinking.
Oh, I also want to say I'm going to be.
It's very entertaining, actually.
Yeah, I think
there is an entertainment value.
I think I'm very funny on it, if I say so.
Honestly, you should be at least letting people know about that a little bit more.
Yeah,
this is not like taking a class. You're learning a lot, but there's still the water boat energy comes through. Water boat intellectualism.
Also, I'll be reading a poem by Ebenezer Cook called "The Sotweed Factor," which is from the 1600s as well, about how Virginia was entirely swindlers and scam artists and stuff like that. So good thing America.
We just actually gamed one out, which I'm pretty excited about, to be honest.
Oh yeah, actually Michael will be on Literary Hangover in the new year. We got a good episode cooking up on Orwell.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. All right, folks, see you in the fun half.
Left is best. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
You know, I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous, you're a little bit upset, you're riled up.
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude, you want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
Some good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457. 2, 38, 56, 27. 1/2. 5 eighths. 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy!
Dance, dance, dance.
Rand Paul.
I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're nothing.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabber.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good. Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey, Sam. Hey, Andy. You guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
That guy might be a Nazi.
Agreed.
No.
Death to America.
You.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way! Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook. Throw our hands up.
Ooh.
Wow.
But Sam, I gotta get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me...
Hey, shut up!
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.